Have you ever felt what it's like to be invisible? I lived that way for decades. I cared for a boy who wasn't my son, with money I didn't have, and love that no one acknowledged. When the system took him from me, I thought my life had ended right there. But do you know what happens when you love someone without expecting anything in return? Sometimes that return comes, even if it takes 30 years, a terminal illness, and the most improbable reunion you could imagine. I'm Lucille Harper, and today I'm going to tell you the story of how I lost everything and gained back so much more than I ever dreamed of. Get ready, because what you're about to hear might change your life too. And before we begin, I just want to ask one quick thing. If this story touches your heart at any point, please hit that like button and subscribe. It's not just a click. It's a way to show me that you also believe no one deserves to be invisible. Now take a deep breath, because you'll never forget this story. I spent most of my life in a forgotten part of East Cleveland, where the houses seemed to hold their breath along with us. There was rotten wood on the porches, the smell of frying food in the air, and sirens singing at night as if they were part of the background music. But what really hurt was the neglect. There, we didn't live. We survived. I did odd jobs, ironed clothes, cleaned bathrooms, sometimes sewed curtains or mended clothes for neighbors who barely had enough to eat themselves. On Sundays, I'd sit on my porch with a mug of weak coffee and watch the neighborhood, as if trying to understand the silence. The children played, running between leaking fire hydrants, and the adults pretended everything was fine. That's how I started to notice Helena. She was new to the area. She had moved in next door with her young son, and even surrounded by so much scarcity, she carried a kind of hope in her eyes that bothered and enchanted me at the same time. We started exchanging words little by little. A good morning here, a borrowed cup of sugar there. In a short time, we became confidants. Helena told me she was raising her son alone, that she worked double shifts as a cashier in a grocery store, and that she barely saw the little one awake. Samuel, that was his name. A thin, shy little boy with eyes too big for his small face. There was something in that gaze, something that made me feel the world had already been cruel to him, prematurely. I never had children. I had a husband who left too soon, and dreams that faded like old light bulbs. But when I saw that boy watching me from the fence, holding a piece of squashed bread with both hands, I knew God still had plans for me. I started to get closer. I invited him to sit on the porch with me. I read stories I didn't even remember I knew anymore. His mother trusted me, and that created an invisible bond between the three of us. Their house was more fragile than mine. Helena always said, if the roof doesn't fall in this week, it's a bonus. Still, she made magic with the little she had. Samuel never seemed hungry, but only because he shared what he got with his mother. Sometimes he'd bring me a broken cookie and say, "For you, Miss Lou." I smiled, but inside my chest ached. That child deserved so much more. I didn't know at that time that all of it was just the beginning, that the little we lived together was about to become a memory I would carry for decades, with a lump in my throat and a prayer in my heart. But back then, we were just trying to exist. The routine adjusted without us even realizing it. Helena would leave Samuel with me on days when her shift doubled and she had no day off. I'd make pancakes with expired flour, cut fruit donated by the local church, and put on old cartoons for him to watch while I sewed on the couch. He liked to be close, watching me in silence. Sometimes he'd stretch out his little hands to help pull the thread or hold a button. He had a delicacy that moved me and hunger for affection that broke my heart. He started calling me Auntie Lou. Then it became just Lou, until one day, without thinking, he blurted out, "Mom." Helena heard. I froze. She was quiet for a moment, then looked at me with teary eyes and said, "If it were up to me, he could call you whatever he wanted." Those words stuck with me. I never had children, but right there, in that instant, I knew what it was like to be called with love by someone who saw you as home. Samuel told me things he didn't tell anyone else. He said he saw his mother crying secretly in the bathroom, that sometimes dinner was just a thin glass of milk, that he was afraid of being alone if something happened. I listened attentively and tried not to cry in front of him. With each confession, he clung more to me. It was as if, unintentionally, we were building a bond that neither time nor the system would be able to erase. Helena grew more and more tired. Her cough wouldn't go away. Her face was losing color. I told her to see a doctor, but she just replied, "Without health insurance, Lou, no one looks at us." And she was right. In the U.S., poverty doesn't just make you sick, it kills. I started visiting her every night with soup, compresses, and sometimes just to hold her hand while she slept. Samuel no longer left my side, and every time he hugged me, I prayed to God to let us stay like that, together. It was on a gray afternoon that Helena didn't wake up. Samuel went into the room and screamed for her. I rushed in, picked him up, and just said, "Shh, I'm here." Her body was still warm, but her soul had already left. I called emergency services, the community pastor, and even the manager of the grocery store where she worked. No one responded quickly. There, a poor person's death doesn't cause commotion. It just adds another number. That night, Samuel slept with me, clutching my arm. I didn't sleep. I lay there looking at the ceiling, trying to understand how I was going to take care of him now. I knew the state would come. I knew they wouldn't let me keep him. But I also knew one thing. I wasn't going to leave him alone without a fight. And it was there, in the dark of my rented living room, that I promised myself, this boy will be somebody someday, and I'll be alive to see it. After the funeral, the world continued to spin, as if Helena had never existed. There were no flowers, no dignified burial, just a simple cremation paid for by church charity, and a cardboard box they gave me with the ashes. Samuel was quiet for days. He didn't cry. He didn't speak. He just followed me like a shadow, and I didn't know what to do but hug him and promise him he wasn't alone. Because he wasn't, not as long as I breathed. I started caring for him as if he were my own. I'd wake up early, make breakfast with what I had, and take him with me when I went to clean houses or sew. Some employers looked at me with suspicion. Others were moved and gave me used clothes or snacks for him. Samuel slowly started to smile again. He liked to call me my old owl because of my big glasses, and every night he'd ask me to tell the same story, the one about the tree that protected the boy until the end of his life. I think he knew I was his tree, but not everyone saw it with tenderness. A new neighbor, who claimed to work in child safety, started asking too many questions. He thought it was strange for a single elderly woman to be with a boy who was clearly not her grandson. I lied, said he was my nephew, my cousin's son, that it was temporary, but I felt time was running out. At any moment, the system could knock on my door, and when that happened, I knew the outcome. He would be taken, and I would lose the only bond I had left. I started hiding Samuel on days when I went out. I'd leave him at a friend's house or take him with me on crowded buses to distant jobs. We lived in fear. Every siren, every knock at the door made me freeze. I prayed every night for God to blind the eyes of the authorities just one more day, just one more week. Because how do you explain to a system of forms and protocols that this boy was my family, even without blood, papers, or adoption? One day, coming home from the market, I saw two social workers standing in front of my house. They were carrying clipboards. My heart leapt into my throat. I tried to turn back, but one of them recognized me. Samuel wasn't with me that day, and yet they knew. They said an anonymous report had been made. They asked to come in. I made up an excuse, pretended to have a fever, invented a church visit. They left, but left a warning. They would return with backup, with a warrant, with a judge's decision. That night, I didn't eat. I didn't sleep. I lay next to Samuel, who was still dreaming like a child. I watched him breathe, and deep down, I already knew. The next day they would come, and I wouldn't be able to stop them. But even so, in the dark of my room, I whispered to God, if you are just, this boy will still remember me, even if it's in 30 years. They returned 2 days later, this time with an official car and a police officer at the wheel. I knew it was the end as soon as I looked through the curtain. Samuel was on the couch drawing a bird on a piece of bread, and I wanted to freeze that instant. I thought about locking the door, escaping through the back, hiding him in the closet. But the real world doesn't allow for poor people's heroism. They knocked, and I opened. The social worker handed me a paper with the state's letterhead. A judge had ordered the immediate removal of the child due to lack of financial means, absence of legal bond, and emotional risk to the minor. Emotional risk, as if love without paperwork was a crime. I tried to argue, asked for more time, said I was seeking help, that the church could intercede, but they didn't want to listen. The decision had already been made even before the conversation began. Samuel, seeing the uniformed men, clung to my legs. "No, Mom, please." It was the first time he called me that in front of other people. I knelt down and hugged him tightly. I wanted to remember his smell, his warmth. The officer approached slowly, as if dealing with a wounded animal, and perhaps he was. I bit my lip until it almost bled, but I didn't cry. I just repeated, "You'll be okay, my love. I promise. I'll find you." They put him in the back seat of an ordinary car, with no one inside understanding what they were destroying. I stood on the sidewalk, alone, with empty arms and a shattered chest. When the car turned the corner, something in me also turned. It wasn't just pain. It was helplessness, injustice, and a kind of grief only those who have lost someone still living know. Because he still existed, but he was no longer mine. In the following days, I became an automatic body. I'd wake up, clean the floor, wash clothes, pretend to eat. I sent letters to the shelter address they gave me, but I never got a response. I called dozens of times. I went there. They said he had already been transferred, that he was now in state custody, awaiting adoption, and then they told me, "You have no right to know anything else." I went home with a plastic bag containing his drawings. One of them was of us holding hands with a smiling sun in the sky. I taped it to the living room wall with old adhesive tape, and every night before sleeping I'd look at that drawing as if praying, because for me, that image was all that was left of my family, and I promised myself he'll still remember me, even if it's at his last breath. The years passed like loose leaves carried by the wind. I continued my routine, cleaning houses, caring for the elderly, sewing for neighbors, but nothing had color anymore. It was like living inside a turned-off radio. The noise of life continued outside, but inside me it was just muffled static. Everywhere reminded me of Samuel, the park bench where he ate peanut butter sandwiches, the stair step where he drew with chalk, the porch chair he swung with his feet. I tried to go on, sometimes stronger, sometimes just out of obligation. They called me Miss Lou in the neighborhood, and I replied with an automatic smile. But those who really knew me saw the emptiness in my eyes. Every birthday, I'd buy a simple cake, put a candle on it, and leave it on the window. One day, a neighbor asked me, "Who's that cake for, Lou?" I replied, "For someone who will still come back." She didn't understand, and she didn't need to. That was just between me, God, and him. I kept everything that reminded me of him in a blue shoebox. His first drawing, the juice cap he thought was pretty, the button from a shirt he once lost. That box became my relic. On harder nights, I'd open it just to touch the memories. Sometimes I'd cry. Others I'd smile with guilt. And still others, I'd be silent, as if each object said what was missing. One day I read in the local newspaper about a young prodigy doctor, adopted as a child, who had just founded a network of community clinics in Chicago. His name was different, but there was something familiar about that smile. I kept the newspaper, but I didn't get my hopes up. I couldn't delude myself. More than 15 years had passed. The boy I knew was already a grown man. And me, I was just an invisible old woman among so many tired faces. It was around this time that I started feeling a strange fatigue. Climbing stairs became a challenge. Cuts took a long time to heal. Food lost its taste. But, as always, I didn't go to the doctor. Without health insurance, without a car, without anyone nearby, you learn to endure as long as your body lets you. I said it was just old age catching up. A lie. Deep down, I knew something was wrong. But I also knew that if it was serious, I wouldn't be able to pay. And perhaps that was fate, to live putting out fires until the last match. But deep down, I still carried a prayer. May he be well. May he have been happy. May he one day remember me. It took me a long time to accept that it wasn't just fatigue. My body had been giving me signs for months, but I always said it would pass. But it didn't. One random morning, as I tried to get out of bed, my legs gave out. I felt a sharp pain in my back, and my vision blurred. I lay there for hours, listening to the radio on in the neighbor's house, trying to hide my fear with prayer. But faith sometimes also hurts. I called the public ambulance service. The attendant asked me if I had insurance. I laughed. It was better to laugh than to cry. I arrived at the hospital with a plastic bag containing my documents, a bottle of water, and the small blue box of memories. It was all I had left. The place was big, clean, cold. It smelled of alcohol and professional silence. I felt like a number among many others. The receptionist gave me a form and said that, without insurance, I would have to pay everything out of pocket or get on a waiting list for emergency assistance, those social slots that business people finance when they have compassion to spare or leftover taxes. I sat on a hard plastic chair. Beside me, a young woman was crying in silence. On the other side, an elderly man was sleeping, leaning against the wall. I filled everything out with my shaky handwriting. In the emergency contact field, I left it blank, because it had been years since anyone called me family. The receptionist took the form and said that if a network director accepted, they could release treatment at a reduced cost. There are cases that touch someone's heart, she said. I just shook my head. I was directed to basic triage, where a nurse looked at me as if seeing a repeated picture. She said the exams would be expensive, but that my case seemed urgent. She asked if I had been experiencing severe pain for a long time. I answered with my eyes, not with words, because it's tiring to explain to someone who hasn't walked the same path as you. Then they told me to wait. Again, as if our lives were always in someone else's line. I waited for hours. With each new name called, my heart skipped a beat. But it was never mine. I started to feel dizzy, weak, but I didn't complain. I had already learned that when you're poor, even pain has to wait its turn. I looked at the frosted glass window and thought, is this where it all ends? Alone, in a cold chair, with a form in my hand and my dignity at its limit? But then, a nurse suddenly appeared. He was out of breath, as if he had been running. He held my form in his hands and said, Ma'am, are you Lucille? I nodded. He swallowed hard and said, the management has asked for you to be taken immediately to the executive floor. The network president recognized the name. I went up in that elevator like someone climbing a mountain, without knowing if there's ground at the end. The nurse who brought me didn't say anything. He clutched his badge to his chest as if trying to hide his heart. I looked at the mirrored walls, trying to understand what was happening. Why would a woman like me be taken to the executive floor? I had no insurance, no money, no one. I felt like an intruder in a world not made for me. The floor we exited onto was another reality. Shiny floors, modern paintings, cushioned silence. It smelled of polished wood and fresh flowers, not alcohol and fear like the rest of the hospital. A young receptionist greeted me with a calm smile. He asked you to wait here. Before I could ask who he was, she had already disappeared behind a glass door. I stood there alone, with my bag in my lap, and my heart beating louder than any sound around me. On the wall in front of me, there were several framed photos. One of them caught my eye. It was of a tall man, hugging children in toy lab coats as part of a social project. His smile, there was something in that smile, a warmth, a familiarity that made me swallow hard. But I dismissed the thought. I was old, weak, my head full of delusions. It must just be a coincidence. And yet, my fingers trembled more than before. The door finally opened. A man entered with the posture of an executive, and suits I only saw in soap operas. But when he looked at me, everything stopped. His eyes, they were the same, large, expressive, laden with the past. He stopped 2 steps from me. He said nothing, and I, with a dry mouth, managed to whisper, "Samuel?" He nodded slowly. His eyes were already teary. "Is that Mom Lou?" he replied. My world collapsed right there. I put my hand to my mouth. Tears came before any explanation. He approached and hugged me, without fear, without doubt, without warning. And in that hug there was more than words could contain. There was stolen childhood, buried memories, compressed longing. I trembled in his arms. I felt old and small at the same time, but also whole, because somehow he was there, not as a doctor, not as a millionaire, but as the boy I never stopped loving. When we pulled apart, he still held my hand. I could only say one thing. Between tears and suppressed sobs, "I knew you'd remember, even if it was at your last breath. I knew you'd remember me." He wouldn't let me go back to the waiting room. He asked for a gurney, a nurse, and a private suite. I tried to refuse, embarrassed. I said I couldn't pay, that I didn't need anything special. But Samuel looked into my eyes and said, "Mom Lou, please, now it's my turn to take care of you." Those words caught in my throat. After everything I had lived through, hearing that was like a warm blanket after years in the cold. When they took me to the room, I nearly cried. It looked more like a hotel than a hospital. Soft white sheets, silence that didn't hurt, and a window view that made me feel human again. A nurse walked in carrying a tray with hot soup, soft new slippers, and a nightgown that smelled like lavender. I hadn't felt that kind of care in decades. I cried internally, not from pain, but from shock. For the first time in decades, I was being cared for, without suspicion, without rush, without obligation. That night, I watched him asleep in the armchair next to my bed, his forehead resting on his hand. Every time I opened my eyes, he was still there, as if afraid I'd vanish if he looked away. The next day, I had tests done, tests I never dreamed I'd be able to get. I watched Samuel speak to the doctors with such calm authority, like he had done this 1,000 times. It felt surreal seeing that same little boy now, in full command. I watched him from afar, trying to understand how that thin boy had become that man, with a firm posture but sweet eyes. He explained each step of the treatment to me patiently. He said the diagnosis was serious, but treatable, and that, as long as I wanted to fight, he would be with me. He called me my family. I turned my face to hide my tears. During my bath, I dropped a bar of soap and tried to bend down, but my legs gave out. The nurse rushed over, but Samuel got there first. He wrapped me in a towel as if I were made of glass. "Don't be ashamed, Mom Lou. I would trade everything I have for one more day with you. When I was a child, that broke my heart, because I would give everything I don't have to give him back those years. But maybe there was still time to rebuild something. On the third day, he brought a breakfast tray. "Today you're going to eat with me," he said, pulling up a chair. We sat there, eating in silence, exchanging shy smiles, like two people reuniting, and still learning to recognize each other. He told me about his life, his adoption, his studies, his difficulties, his losses, and I told him about my years of struggle, of longing, of promises whispered to God. It was as if two worlds had merged there on that hospital tray. Before leaving the room, he looked at me and said, "This isn't charity, Mom Lou. It's a debt of love, and I haven't even started paying." Days later, Samuel appeared in the room with a different smile. He said I was discharged, but not to go back to my old house. "You're going to a safe, comfortable place, your own." Before I could protest, he put the key to a house in my hands. It's not charity. It's my way of saying, you'll never again be cold, hungry, or afraid. "It's over, Mom Lou," I cried in silence. For decades, no one had given me something without wanting anything in return. A black car with a driver was waiting for me at the hospital exit. Inside, plush blankets, a new bag, and even a bathrobe with my initials embroidered. I didn't understand any of it. I thought it was all exaggerated. But Samuel said, "This is the least you deserve." When we arrived, I saw the house, small, charming, with a flowered porch and a sign at the entrance that read, "Harper's Nest." I almost fainted. He named the house after me. That was more than a gift. It was an altar of gratitude. I stayed there for a few days, recovering. Every morning a caregiver brought me my favorite tea. There was a bookshelf filled only with old children's storybooks, the same ones I used to read to him. And above the fireplace, lovingly framed, was the drawing he had made as a boy, me and him holding hands under a smiling sun. That's when I realized he had kept it. That crumpled sheet I thought time had swallowed, he never forgot. On a Friday night, he invited me out to dinner. He said he wanted to introduce me to someone. When we arrived at the elegant restaurant, I was greeted with warm hugs from 2 children, his kids. "Is this Grandma Lou?" the younger one asked. My eyes filled with tears before I could even answer. Beside them, a sweet woman, who smiled as if she already knew me. "He talks about you almost every day." It was his wife. And there, at that table, I understood that I wasn't just a guest. I was part of that family. We dined amidst laughter, stories, and a light wine that made me blush. For the first time in many years, I didn't eat in a hurry. I didn't watch the clock. I didn't fear the bill. At the end of the night, Samuel held my hand across the table and said, "Now my children will have a grandmother too. You didn't raise me for nothing." I didn't know what to say. I just squeezed his hand back and smiled with an overflowing heart. And as we left together, the driver opened the door for me, as if I were a queen. Perhaps at that moment, I truly was the queen of the home I helped build, even when the world tried to erase me. Today I live in a house with a porch, flowers in the garden, and the name Harper's Nest embroidered on the living room cushion. It's mine. For the first time I can say that, with an open heart. It's mine. Samuel made sure to give me every detail, and more than that, he gave me back the rarest thing there is for a woman forgotten by time: dignity. Here I have silence when I need it, comfort when I want it, and visits that fill my days with life. On weekends, the black van pulls up with the grandchildren running up the steps before the driver even opens the door. They come in shouting, "Grandma Lou!" with a joy that seems to light up the rooms. Samuel's wife brings desserts, helps me tend to the flowers, and we sit together and talk like old friends. And he looks at me with the same boyish gaze, now full of gratitude. That's how we built a home between 2 houses, without needing to live under the same roof. I have a caregiver during the week, a kind driver who takes me on outings, and a closet full of new dresses I didn't even have to choose. But what moves me most is that no one does this out of pity. It's out of love. It's out of memory. It's for a story that united us when no one believed it was worth keeping alive bonds that didn't come from blood. But they came from care, from comfort, from choice. One day I asked Samuel why he never looked for me. He answered in a low voice, "Mom Lou, I did look, but you were off the radar, like so many invisible women in this country. And just when I gave up, you appeared on the charity file. And I knew, right away, it was God. It was destiny. It was you. That went straight through me, because for years I thought I had been forgotten. But, in reality, I was just waiting to be found again. I still have that blue box with the old drawings and the notes he used to leave me as a child. Only now it stays open, on the living room shelf, because it's no longer a relic of pain. It's an altar of victory. I look at it every day and think, it was worth it. The silent love, the sacrifice, the tears hidden in the cheap pillow, all of it built this present. A present full of peace. And if this story has reached you, I want you to remember one thing. You don't need paperwork to be family. You just need memory, care, and the courage to love when the world turns its back. Because one day, even if it takes decades, love comes back. And when it comes back, it calls you by the name only the heart recognizes. If you've made it this far, maybe you're feeling the same way I feel now. Life taught me that no matter how much time passes, how many doors close, or how many people tell you you're worthless, someone will always remember you. Someone will always see your value. And that silent love you gave, one day will return, multiplied. Today, thanks to Samuel, I not only regained my health, my dignity, and my place in the world. I regained the most important thing, my story. A story that began with pain and loss, but ended in redemption, justice, and family. And now I want to hear from you. Have you ever experienced something like this? Have you ever felt forgotten by the world? And then had a reunion that changed your life? Share your story in the comments. I read every single one of them, with the same love that I told my own story. If this message touched your heart, please like and share it with someone who needs to hear these words today. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel. It's free, takes just 1 second, but it means a lot to me because no one, absolutely no one, deserves to live invisibly. Thank you for being a part of this with me. See you in the next video, and always remember, your love is never wasted.